Hello Year 10, we are moving on to Act 1 Scene 2 this week, so you will be introduced properly to the character of Portia, who was mentioned in Act 1 Scene 1 by Bassanio as somebody that he was clearly in love with. She is beautiful, she was described as virtuous, and importantly we looked at last week at how she was richly left. And this links to what we're going to have a little look at today. So I'm going to talk you through the scene. Most importantly, this is an extract that you have been given, not the whole scene. So really in your own time it would be helpful if you could read the scene. If you use Spark Notes, there's a No Fear Shakespeare which gives you a translation of it that will help. But I'm going to talk you through the extract, and I'll just give you a little bit of context as to what goes on in the rest of the scene before we move on. So here we go. So in Act 1 Scene 2 we meet Portia and her handmaiden Nerissa. Technically, Nerissa works for Portia, but they are very much like best friends. And Nerissa, considering she is somebody who is paid by Portia, she works within her house, they are particularly friendly. Nerissa can get away with saying relatively cheeky things to Portia because they have such a close friendship. Which is quite interesting because we've also looked at one of your challenge questions. We looked at Antonio and Bassanio last lesson, and how actually it would appear that Bassanio is extremely fond of Bassanio. He says that he would lay down his life for him. He'd go to the extremest means. He'd give him his purse, which means his money. And Bassanio is also very fond of Antonio, but equally there's an element of love there that we're not quite as certain about as to whether Bassanio loves Antonio in quite the same way. So what they reveal in this scene today is that there's a test that Portia's father has set out. The men must pass this test in order to be able to marry Portia. She is considered a very wealthy young woman, but that wealth will not be inherited directly to her. She has to share it with a husband. And she doesn't get to pick that husband, which we'll have a look at in a minute. They have to pass this, what they call the casket test. They discuss the ridiculous men who have failed so far. Bassanio mentioned there were suitors coming in from the four corners of the earth. They come from all around the world to try and win Portia's hand in marriage by passing this test. But a lot of the men that Nerissa and Portia discuss are absolutely ridiculous. Some of the names of the gentlemen are County Palatine, the Neapolitan Prince, Monsieur Le Bon, Falconbridge, who is a British lord, an English lord, and a Scottish lord. And they talk through each one. Portia very scathingly and very angrily explains why she hates them so much, and she's very happy to see them go at the end of this scene. She talks about Falconbridge in particular. Shakespeare uses some humour here. He plays on the idea that he's got an English audience in front of him, and he does a bit of stereotyping. So he describes Falconbridge as the sort of man who expects everybody else to use their English language rather than him have to learn things. He uses a bit of stereotyping with the Scottish lord as well, talking about him being tight-fisted with money and not prepared to spend out anything. All of these stereotypes that are still considered comically effective in today's comedy genre. Finally, at the very end of the scene, they introduce the fact that Portia remembers Bassanio and considers him actually to be one of the gentlemen she thinks is more worthy of positive praise than those that she has met so far. But she does not know that Bassanio is on his way. In fact, the next person that will come to her house in Belmont will be the Prince of Morocco. And there is some extension work on your task for that. So reading through, I'm just going to talk you through it so that it makes sense. If to do were as easy to know what were good to do, chapels had been churches and poor men's cottages, princes' palaces. This purely means, if it was as easy to do the right thing as it is to tell people the right thing to do, then everywhere would be perfect. You wouldn't have just chapels, you would have grand churches. You wouldn't have poor men in cottages. Everybody would do the right thing and everybody would be of equal wealth and everything would be beautiful. So it's to do with easier to tell people what to do than do it. It is a good divine that follows his own instructions. So you'd almost have to be divine, heavenly, to be able to achieve all the good things that supposedly we should do. She says, I can easier teach 20 what were good to be done than be one of the 20 to follow mine own teaching. So she would find it easier to tell them how to be good than to actually do it herself. The brain may devise laws for the blood, but a hot temper leaps over a cold decree. So she says that the head tries to rule the heart. But if you've got a hot temper, if you've got a fiery temper, that you cannot necessarily rationalise that and do what you've been told to do. She describes it as a hare is madness, the youth, to skip over the meshes of good counsel, the cripple. So she likens the idea of telling people to do the right thing and expecting them to do it. It's a bit like expecting an old man to catch a bouncy young hare. And she describes youthfulness of themselves to be a bit like these young hares. But this reasoning is not in the fashion to choose me a husband. Oh me, the word choose. I may neither choose whom I would, nor refuse whom I dislike. This is the integral part of this extract here. She does not get to choose. Choosing is not an option. It sounds like she gets to choose her husband, but she doesn't. She doesn't get to refuse anybody either. It's out of her control. So is the will of a living daughter, curbed by the will of a dead father. So she is the living daughter, Portia, and the will of a dead father. Her father has died, and he has left this legacy that says she must marry the man that passes this test. It is not hard, Nerissa, that I cannot choose one nor refuse none. She is really upset. Portia's quite, as she's described it, a hot-tempered young lady. She is driven, she knows what she wants, and unfortunately her father has taken that out of her hands. Nerissa replies, your father was ever virtuous, and holy men at their death have good inspirations. Therefore the lottery that he hath devised in these 3 chests of gold, silver and lead, whereof who choose his meaning, chooses you, will no doubt never be chosen by any rightly, but one who shall rightly love. But what warmth is there in your affection towards any of these princely suitors that are already come? So what Nerissa is explaining to us here is that there are 3 chests of gold, silver and lead. They get referred to as caskets later on. There are 3 caskets in in Portia's house. That one is gold, one is silver and one is lead. And inside will be a picture of Portia, and that is the winning casket. The 3 gentlemen, the suitors that come in will have to pick from the 3 caskets. And once they have opened the casket, if there's nothing in there, they've lost. They need to walk away, and they're not allowed to tell anybody what they've picked. They must never marry as well another woman. So not only do they not get Portia, but they have to remain unmarried for the rest of their lives. That's not in this scene. That's just me giving you a bit of context. What they're looking for is to open the casket and find the picture of Portia. So far, nobody has won. And then this final question from Nerissa leads us into the discussion that I've already talked you through. These are the gentlemen that have already been County Palatine, Neapolitan Prince, Monsieur Le Bon, Falconbridge, Scottish Lord, there's a Duke of Saxony as well. All of these gentlemen coming from different countries, and none of them are to Portia's liking. The final thing that they state, as I've said, is that Bassanio is the only one that she thinks is worthy of any praise. So we consider this a lottery, the idea that it's just guesswork. The gentlemen have to guess which casket is the right one, and whoever gets the right casket out of the gold, silver and lead chooses you, so gets to marry Portia. The choosing, unfortunately, is not up to Portia, it's up to the gentleman, which is very typical of our patriarchal society, which, remember, is where men are in charge of society.